Grief is not easy. It is not straightforward. It does not make sense. Hello people universe, it's me Lisa, and I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that this week's video is going to be emotionally heavy and a little bit personal. So if that's not the kind of content that you signed up for, completely understand. Hopefully I'll see you next Tuesday when I have something else on my channel. But for today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about my journey with grief. I have been going back and forth about posting a video about my grief and everything that I've gone through, coming to terms with the loss of my dad. And it took me a long time to figure out whether or not I wanted to make a video. And I think that it's important to acknowledge the fact that grief is not a linear path. It doesn't all of a sudden disappear. The feelings of loss will always stay with you and grief will always be there. And I don't think people talk about it enough because it's uncomfortable and it's sad and it's confusing and it's messy. And people don't want to acknowledge things like that. They want to pretend that they don't exist and brush them off and move on with life. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to acknowledge that grief is valid. And it is important to come to terms with the fact that it is a real serious thing that people need to be more considerate of and mindful of. When I had first started getting back into making videos after taking 2 years off, I had mentioned that there was a significant loss in my family, and in my previous video I had mentioned that it was my dad who passed. I'm not going to go into specific details. There's so many things that I could say, but I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the difficult part, which is the aftermath of losing someone, whether it be a loved one, a friend, family member, whoever is special and important in your life, and how to cope with that, or at least my experience with coping with something that significant. So it'll be a year in July, and I'm currently filming this towards the end of March. So we're getting close to a year mark, and it's hard to believe that it's been that long. It's hard to believe that so much time has passed and he hasn't been around, or at least depending on what you believe, physically around. I'm probably gonna get pretty emotional in this video, so there is no reason to do makeup today because I'll probably just cry it off. And if crying makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but that kind of comes with grief. There's a lot of sadness and pain. And I think something that people don't acknowledge when you lose someone is that not only are you losing the person, but you're losing the experiences and the things that you imagined you would be able to do with them or they would be around for. There's always the knowledge at the back of your mind that you're gonna outlive your parents. And I feel like that's something as children we come to terms with, but we always assume that it'll happen when we're older. When I say older, I mean if you want to get married, if you got married, and if you want kids after you had kids, or just later on in life when you approach middle age, I would say that's when you kind of expect that, when you are in a better stage of life to, I guess, cope with it. I don't think it becomes any easier to cope with, but I think the maturity of being older definitely helps and braces you for the fact that you're dealing with it. And as I have mentioned multiple times, I'm 22 years old. My mom's very young. My dad was very young. And so you assume, or at least in my case, that they would be around for quite some time. And so suddenly when something happens and they're not around anymore, it kind of throws you for a loop and it makes you question pretty much everything. For me, I always thought that my dad would be around to see me get married, to meet his future grandkids, to tell them stories, and to see my younger siblings grow up. And that's simply not the case. And so when you think about losing someone, you don't think about all that you have lost and will lose out on. And so eventually, depending on how you process your grief and where you are on your grief journey, you'll realize these things, and it makes it so much harder to deal with, no matter how mentally prepared you are for it. I had no way to prepare for this because I had talked to him the week before, and all of a sudden he was gone. It all happened so fast and it was a complete whirlwind and it was so confusing. Kind of getting back to dealing with grief and how I started to approach recognizing my grief. I started off very numb. I couldn't believe that it happened. I was so spaced out. I was lost. So many preconceived notions of my life were gone. And I feel like, at least in my opinion, having parents grants you a little bit of stability and a feeling of safety. And that was suddenly ripped away from me. And I think in order to protect myself from all the pain that I was going to feel and still do feel, I let myself become very numb to everything and very cold. I try to distance myself from it. I feel like I needed to be strong, that I needed to not let it break me. It took me a while to be able to embrace the sadness and embrace the frustration, the anger, the regret, the guilt, everything that comes with grief. It took me a long time to be able to start breaking down those walls and to see them for what they are and to acknowledge that that's part of losing someone. Those emotions are completely valid. They don't mean that you're a bad person or that you didn't care. I obviously do care because I'm getting very emotional. I started therapy about 2 weeks after, and that helped in the way that I was just able to work through it and to talk about what was going on in my life. And I have so many family and friends that reached out. They were so amazing. They still are amazing. I'm so grateful for them, especially my mom. My mom was my rock and she helped me through pretty much everything. And I'm so thankful for her too. But all those friends and family, it really made me feel loved and supported, and that if I needed anything, I know I could reach out to them and they would do what they could to help me. And so having that support system definitely was very reassuring. It was a little overwhelming at times just because I wasn't able to process. And I remember those 2 weeks before I started going to therapy, I was so fuzzy. I couldn't keep track of time. Hours just blurred together. It was so hard for me to keep my head on straight. I couldn't focus on anything for like more than a couple of minutes. It was all just so blurry and confusing, and since I was next of kin, there were a lot of decisions that needed to be made. Paperwork, funeral arrangements, all of these things I needed to be at least somewhat present for, even if I'm off somewhere in my mind. And so I honestly don't know how any of that got done, to be fair. Therapy really helped. I know that there are grief support groups and phone numbers I could have used, but I had my support system and I was going to therapy and I was working through it and everything was going in a positive direction, I would say. And eventually I started to experience my sadness and to work through it and to acknowledge that just because a person is no longer living doesn't mean that they're necessarily not still around or that your love for them is gone, because love transcends death. People always see loss as a terrible thing because it is, and the grief that you feel can be unbearable at times, but there is the one positive. All the happy memories, the laughs, the fun times, everything. Even though you may have lost someone, you don't lose that. You don't lose all those wonderful things. Amazing memories, you don't lose those. Those are yours forever. Unless you have a really crappy memory, and then I would suggest writing it down. That's my attempt at making a joke, even though probably didn't carry very well. And another thing about grief people don't realize is that it comes in waves. You don't suddenly wake up one day and feel amazing and you're like, my grief is gone, I don't have to experience it ever again. It's a miracle. No, that's not how grief works. It's a lot messier than that. And at one point I was looking up quotes about grief and it compared grief to a window. It makes sense in the fact that you'll be doing great for a couple days or a month or years, and then all of a sudden you'll see something or you'll hear something or experience something and it'll trigger you and you'll start crying for no apparent reason. It could be something so simple. For example, a couple days after, my dog was playing with his Lorax toy and I just started bawling. It's like, why am I crying? Because my dog's playing with a toy. I'll go on a walk and I will be looking at nature and something like that reminds me of him. And so you don't know when those things will happen. You don't know when you'll see them, you'll hear them, you'll experience them, but they will happen and you will be triggered and you will remember that person. And sometimes you'll smile, sometimes you'll laugh, and sometimes you'll cry. Maybe you'll do all three. It can happen at any time. And just because you're 10 years down the road and you've come to terms with the fact that you lost someone important to you doesn't mean that you won't still experience those moments, because you will. You'll live with it for the rest of your life. And that's a really tough pill to swallow. But some things that I did to come to terms with my grief is the most obvious one, I will say, is to cry. It's okay to cry. People expect you to be sad. People expect you to feel hurt, to feel the pain of losing someone. And it's a very natural reaction when you experience sadness to cry. Take some time and just let it out, because if you try to hold it in, it just festers. It gets so much more painful to deal with. If you can just take some time and come to terms with your emotions, it can save you a lot of pain down the road. Also, something that worked for me is taking walks, whether they be by myself or with my dog. Those really helped because it allowed me to clear my mind and to get out of my room. If you can do something, I know COVID restrictions kind of make that difficult, but just get outside, experience a little bit of sun, or even like go and get a coffee. Just something that gets you out of your space, because sometimes everything starts to weigh on you when you don't feel like you're able to do anything and the weight of the world is on your shoulders crushing you slowly. It sometimes helps to get a change of scenery. Something else I did for the first month and then on and off for a few months afterwards is that I was journaling. I was actually going to read through my journal entries before I recorded this, but then I thought that I probably wouldn't have been able to not cry. Obviously, that didn't work. I wouldn't have been able to just sit through the intro without crying, and I feel like that would be a major deterrent. If you're a creative person or you have creative interests, drawing, painting, reading, writing, DIY projects, any creative outlet is always a positive thing. And so if you can channel your emotions into that, do it. If you have people in your life, any type of support system, reaching out to them, talking to other people, sometimes having a conversation with someone can change the feeling of the day. Even just a really simple conversation, because it makes you feel not so isolated and not so alone. Be in a situation where you can vent a little bit, even if you don't want to go into super specific details, or if you don't want to go super in depth, or if you just want a distraction, because sometimes you just need something to get you by for a little while. Talking about anything with anyone is definitely a major help. When you go through loss, it helps you reevaluate every person in your life. It made me see who actually matter and the people that I want to keep in my life, and it made me feel that I mattered and that there are people in my life who care. And I'm so beyond grateful. I will say it a million times over. I'm so beyond grateful for the people in my life. I'm so beyond grateful for my mom, my cousin, my uncle, my grandma, all the people that reached out, my old coworkers, friends, just everyone who made an effort to just let me know that they were there. It meant a lot and it helped me through quite a bit. And so if you have people in your life that you can reach out to, definitely reach out. Definitely, if you need help, don't be afraid to ask for help. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you anything in a negative way. To me, it takes a lot of courage to ask for help, and honestly, all it does is better yourself. I've always been someone who struggles to ask for help. It's okay, but at the same time, you have to know your limits, and you have to know that if you do need help, there are people that you can talk to and reach out to, and you don't need to be afraid of that. All right, well, I have been rambling on for quite some time. I'm sorry if this is all over the place. Hopefully, I talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. If not, I'm sure future Elisa will bring up anything that I forgot. Also, I should probably mention this. If you're someone who's experiencing grief, or you know someone that's going through their grief journey, or if you recently experienced a loss of any kind, remember that you're not alone and that there are people that care about you and love you and will support you. And there are also many ways that you can deal with grief. There are support groups, there's hotline numbers, there's therapy. If you know someone going through this, reach out, ask them how they're doing, let them know that you're there for them. It doesn't have to be anything super crazy, just to acknowledge their loss and let them know that you're there for them. And that can make such a difference. Hopefully this video helped and shed some light on grief. I know, like I said, I ramble. I probably was all over the place, but that's kind of like how grief is. They say that there's 5 stages of grief, and honestly, after experiencing this, I would say that's pretty much BS, because you may experience all of those in separate stages. You may experience all of those in one day. You may experience them in different orders. You may never go through some of them. Grief is not easy. It is not straightforward. It does not make sense. To me, it serves as a reminder that you loved someone very much, and that can't be taken away from you. No matter how much time goes by, that person will always be in your heart and at the back of your mind. And that should be seen as a positive thing and not a negative thing. I guess that is it for this video, so I will see you guys in the next one, and hopefully it'll be a happier one, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.